Relatively new financial disease. It is called debt. It is caused by an invincible bug called loans. As a result, millions of South Africans are battling with over-indebtedness. Debtor's disease, as we shall call it, is a silent killer. Now, this is because debt kills respect, kills marriages, self-control, and above all, our basic unit of society, the family. There isn't even a single part of your life that debt won't touch. Moreover, we are always told that millions of South Africans are drowning in a sea infested with the so-called loan bug. But behind these statistics, there exist individuals with significant stories to tell about the debt disease. Now, one of them is Julia Moroka, who joins us now from our Pretoria studios. Julia, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Julia, let us understand your story and how it all began. Tell us how you became debt-ridden.
It started with my first marriage. I'm divorced twice. And I would say that is the reason why I am divorced twice at a young age. My first marriage, I had to fight myself at the High Court to see myself removed at the credit bureau because my ex-husband was just spending money, partying, making debts unplanned, and until we divorced. He was also abusive. You would realize that as we accumulate debts, abuse steps in because at some stage you will fight. Partners will fight about money. And then I moved out of the house and I left with my son. And I had to fight myself out through the High Court because I believed from a young age that as a hard worker, I think I had that thing that I want to have a financial freedom life. And I didn't like debts. But I happened to be in debt because of the circumstances that really came in. I managed to be free. Then after some while, I met another partner. After some 7 years, I met somebody. And when I got into the relationship, I made it clear to him to say, I am from this relationship and I would like to bring success in your life, and you bring success in my life. And I think I was upfront because I was afraid of the journey that I walked through the courts and the money that I paid through the attorneys and advocates to erase my name from credit bureau. He didn't tell me the truth. And I didn't go to check him up. I believed him. After 5 years of marriage, I was swimming in debts. I was highly abused. I was depressed. I slept in psychiatric hospital. To top out this, I had a problem at work. So my issue with debts come from the fact that from my first marriage, I went through the High Court to be removed. And my second marriage, I entered into a marriage knowing that I do not want debts. But he didn't. He didn't tell me that he was in debt. And he didn't tell me that he had kids with different mothers across the country. I didn't know that. I only knew that he had only 2 children. After we got married, all these women, close to 5 women, came hunting him, asking for maintenance. 2, he was owing families, he was owing cars, he was owing so many people, and he had a fraud case. I think it was running for more than 10 years, and I didn't know about that. He could have told me at least to make an informed choice that I am marrying the right person. Along the way, I incurred debts because he left his job, and I had to save the marriage. The household needed some money to live. We had 3 cars. I had to pay for 3 cars. I had to pay for the bond. We had 2 children by then. I had another child with him. And to pay school fees. So I had to go and make loans. But funny enough, when I was making those loans, when I would go to Nedbank or to FNB, he would go up front, to make pre-approval. And that's the funniest part, that I asked myself, why can my ex-husband make loans on my behalf? But then, because I was maybe in love or trying to be a good woman or trying to save my marriage, I was blind. I thought he was telling me the truth to say he was going to help me pay the debts. It was very difficult. At work was difficult. I was bullied every day. When I came back from home, I was also bullied by my abusive husband because of the debts that I incurred. Because now I started asking, when are we going to pay those debts? Mm-hmm. Along the way, then we had to. He lost his job. He got another job. Then he removed me from his pension fund. I didn't know. I only knew this after we got divorced and realized that maybe with this money, with his pension fund money, I will be able to pay the debts.
Mm-hmm. Let's just hold it there.
That he erased me.
Let's just hold it there for 1 second, Julia. It's a very interesting story. Let's now also, we are joined in our studios by Dr. Becker. He's an industrial psychologist affiliated with the Faculty of Economic and Management Sciences at the University of Johannesburg. Doctor, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Now, you heard Julia's story. As we can see there, it's an undeniable link between debt, stress and poor health. Would you agree with that statement?
Yes, I would definitely agree with that. We see this vicious cycle, especially in South Africa, where people get into debt for one or two reasons. Either sort of keeping up with the Joneses, so living a lifestyle beyond their means, or in alternative cases, I think in Julia's case, is to plug some holes in their financial situation, and then leveraging different sources of debt, whether it's unsecured lending, typically, or just to black market loans to cover those holes and to make their financial situation whole, at least temporarily. But what we do see is normally high debt goes along with a deterioration in mental as well as physical health, and it can be as severe as leading to acute stress and depression, and in the worst case scenario, suicide.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned stress and depression. Would that have an impact in your workplace as well?
Absolutely. We actually see that people who have high levels of debt or incur high levels of debt, they become burned out in the workplace. Burned out is not recognized formally as a pathology, but we definitely see the burnout syndrome, as we refer to it commonly in the workplace, where people become more detached, they become emotionally aloof, and obviously this has got an impact on team structures, team relationships, colleagues in the workplace, and typically what happens, there's a breakdown of trust, there's a breakdown of relationships, and before long the person's performance is going down, and this vicious cycle then completes when the person then ultimately loses their job because of the lack of energy, the depression, the anxiety that comes along with these high levels of debt. So really, if there's no intervention, what we do see is that these high levels of debt can spiral out of control, and like Julia mentioned, this affects basically all spheres of life, whether it be your family life, your relationship with members in your society, and then ultimately also your work role.
Now, Doctor, have you seen, as you heard in Julia's case, is this a classic case in terms of abuse within your relationship? You'll see divorces that happens, and of course financial ruin at the end.
Absolutely. I would say this is probably a classic case, if you can call it that, where we see it a lot when people are not equal partners, financially speaking, in a relationship. And what can then happen is people get exploited. Like Julia said, she felt she was in love. A lot of things just slided. And this is typically how it happens, is you have a attraction to somebody. All your decisions might not be rational or might be prudent financially at that point. And what we see is by the time that sort of the shine goes off the relationship a bit, or let's say the in love period is over, people then realize they are highly indebted. And normally in this case, they've already leveraged a number of sources of credit. And it's fairly difficult for them to get themselves out of the hole if they don't have some kind of debt counseling or rehabilitation. But what's more extreme about the situation is the breakdown in trust in the relationship, because the person now feels that he or she has been exploited for the financial gain of the other partner. And it's not impossible to rectify a situation like that, but as in Julia's case, it's quite difficult to rehabilitate the financial situation as well as the relationship at the same time.
Now, you are researching family relations and divorces. What is the research and the statistics tell us so far in South Africa, Doctor? Is there a number of divorces?
The situation in South Africa in particular is quite dire. We're sitting with a situation where a big proportion of our population is not used to credit, specifically unsecured lending, credit cards in particular. And because they're fairly new to credit and debt, they incur massive amounts of debt. Now, one of the areas here is just purely a lack of knowledge about how financial instruments work. For example, how debt work, how credit cards work, how compounded interest work. And so that's really the first point that we need to understand is, and we have a responsibility towards people who may not have dealt with credit cards or debt or unsecured lending in general, is how to work with debt. What is the implications thereof? How does that affect your financial situation? Secondly, I think, as Julia mentioned, we see that the statistics point to that the financial crisis of 2009 put a lot of psychologically stressed, introduced a lot of psychological stress into relationships worldwide. Mm-hmm. We definitely see a peak in divorce. We see a peak in breaks up in relationships. But our data in South Africa is fairly inconclusive because we're dealing with two broad sectors of the population. Mm-hmm. Normally, the affluent part of the population were not that hard hit by the debt and didn't have to leverage as much credit to get by. So typically, we see the breakdown in trust in relationships, family structures was not impacted that highly, but once again we're talking about 10% of the population here. Mm-hmm. For the other 90% of the population, yes, our initial analysis shows that families have been broken apart. There's been a great distrust between spouses, for example, husband and wife. But unfortunately, it's very hard to get our hands on this kind of data because this is not something that someone wants to volunteer. Mm-hmm. This kind of information.
Thank you so much, Dr.
So
Julia.
the analysis sorry,
Doctor.
Now,
sorry, Doctor. I just want to go back to Julia quickly because we haven't got much time. Julia, what sort of advice and can you give to people out there currently? And are you seeking any help at this point in time?
At this point in time, yes, I'm seeking help, and actually halfway through, I worked hard, to make sure that I am debt free. I can say I'm 5% almost over to be debt free, which is a good thing for me, because if I recall where I think I was owing the whole world, I was owing all the banks, I was owing so much, and I was so depressed. And so I would say to people out there, do not make debts if you know you can't pay. And I think what is close to my heart is families, because I am from a family and I know there are children that are involved. I'm a single parent now with 2 children, and I try hard to be a mother and a father at the same time, because I do not get any maintenance from anyone. At the same time, I have to make sure that I am debt free. So it's so hard, but it just I just had to do it because this is just me. I have to work hard to make sure that at the end my children will be proud of me and I'll be a role model to them. I teach them about debts.
Thank you.
My problem is when you meet a partner that doesn't bring success to your life, you understand? Because in my case, I was debt-free. I didn't have debts. But this person made me to have debts. But at the end, he said to me, it was the reason why I'm in debt it was because I was married. And I don't believe marriage has to do with debts. Marriage has to do with love and support.
Thank you, Julia.
So, because we have children, yes.
Thank you, Julia. Just finally, Doctor, within 5 seconds, your advice to consumers out there.
Yeah, I think I just want to reflect what your other guests have said, what Julia have said is, be careful for specifically when you're doing unsecured lending, specifically credit cards. Try to stay away from that as much as possible because the interest rates are compounded and they're typically very high to start off with. And my other advice would be, if you are deeply indebted, please seek out the help that's available to rehabilitate your debt situation, and be mindful that you should use debt as a last resort if possible. So that would be my advice.
Thank you so much to both of you. That was Dr. Jürgen Becker as well as Julia Moroka, a person that's in debt in our Pretoria studios. Thank you so much. That's all we have time for you at